Hey there, gamers. DreamcastGuy here. Today we're talking about Capcom because there have been some very crazy leaks this morning about the Resident Evil Code Veronica remake, a Devil May Cry remake, and apparently Claire Redfield is the hero of Resident Evil 10. Now I want to talk about this leak because it's very odd in a way, which is that, there's been a lot of talk about how bad the industry is doing. Think about the massive amount of layoffs, of studio closures, of big budget bombs. But Capcom, in a lot of ways, is very much alone. They're still doing pretty much everything people love. Ace Attorney, every time it seems like we're getting giant expansions to Monster Hunter. And of course, a new Resident Evil almost every single year. Even weird experimental stuff. They're tucking in games like Pragmata between everything else. They've even actually raised the pay of Capcom employees multiple times. They're basically getting even better than they've ever been, which is saying something. But this leak is strange because it's kind of a couple different sources combined. And I want to break down what this rumor is, what this rumor isn't, and why I think it's legit, even if it's a bit of an amalgamation of random leakers. Because I think it is legit. I do think there is a chance that Resident Evil 10 is going to be very much like Resident Evil 9, sort of this sewing up of old ideas, but in a way that is still just absolutely so dang good. Let's get into it. Hi, hope you're having a great day. If you could please give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, this is going to be real fun to get into. Well, I probably look like I have a little bit of residual eyeliner on. I went to an emo party this weekend, and I couldn't really fully get the makeup off. But look at this. Capcom has been claimed to be working on several projects, including a Devil May Cry remake, Resident Evil 10, and more Resident Evil remakes. Now, we have talked a lot about Resident Evil on this channel. Resident Evil, my favorite thing in the entire universe. My two favorite things are RE and Final Fantasy. But you get like one Final Fantasy every 6 or 7 years, and in that time you get like 10 new big giant baller Capcom games, right? So I feel like it's hard not to be like the most well-fed, extremely excited Resident Evil fan on the planet. So we have talked about these leaks already. Capcom is apparently doing a Code Veronica remake, a Resident Evil 0 remake, a 1 remake, a 10 remake. But let me talk about where this came from, because this is something that is a bit strange. We talked a lot about Dusk Golem, and in a lot of these tweets, they're sort of attributing it to Dusk Golem. For the most part, Dusk Golem is a Capcom leaker. He has said all sorts of cool insider stuff going back now for, I discovered him about 6 years ago, but this dude does other leaks as well. He's talked about Sony stuff and God of War, and of course, a lot of very big, very crazy leaks that turned out to be 100% true about Silent Hill. So he's trying to clarify that these leaks are not purely from him, and a lot of it's getting attributed to him. He's basically like, yes, I've talked about this. Yes, I have been basically doing a countdown to all these projects. Yes, at Summer Games Fest, we are going to be seeing this like Code Veronica remake, but he wants to be clear, okay, I did not say who the hero of Resident Evil 10 is, and I did not officially myself confirm the Resident Evil 10 remake. So why are people talking about this? Why are people saying that, hey, you announced Devil May Cry coming back? Why? It's a mix of several different leaks at once. And I want to be clear that this is part of where the confusion comes from, right? So this dude is saying, all right, Dusk Golem was saying, I found this other leaker who does very, very good stuff. This dude does a lot of cool Capcom leaks as well. So he says, I'm not going to give the context, but he has said, look, there have been multiple upcoming Resident Evil Requiem DLCs. It's not just going to be one story DLC. So he's basically vouching in a lot of ways for this other leaker. This dude has been tweeting a lot about it. Now, a lot of his stuff is in Spanish. He does a lot of podcasts in Spanish and stuff as well. So the thing that part of this is a language barrier. See, a lot of these things, he straight up says like, look, man, I've been talking about our Resident Evil 1 remake. I've been talking about the protagonist of Resident Evil 10. Y'all aren't watching my Spanish podcast. So people are now going through and actually translating his works. And people are sort of like reversing, here is this guy's leaks vouched by Dusk Golem, aka these are Dusk Golem confirmed reports. And that's not quite the thing. That's basically saying, hey, here is this separate leaker who does have a good track record, and here's how it relates to Capcom. But to say these are like Dusk Golem tweets, not exactly completely accurate. So let's just take this as, I want to discuss these new leaks and why they're so interesting, but let's not consider them to be as official as Dusk Golem. I'm 100% a Dusk Golem believer, but let's go through this bit by bit, because I do think that the leaks to me make 100% sense, that them pivoting towards Claire makes sense the same way they pivoted back towards Leon very hard for an entire decade. So, Devil May Cry remake, currently in active development, marking the first time a full remake of the original game has launched the stylish action series. Very awesome. In June or July, Capcom held an internal meeting to determine the next steps for the Resident Evil franchise, during which green lights were given for Resident Evil 0, Code Veronica, Resident Evil 1, and the new entry, Resident Evil 10. Now, multiple people have talked about this, that basically Resident Evil is just selling insane numbers. Stuff like Resident Evil 7 selling like 30 million copies. All these Resident Evils have just been selling tens of millions of copies. It has made such a massive comeback. A lot of people kind of forget that Resident Evil, for about 10 years there, after Resident Evil 6, was in this weird spot. You'd get little tiny, like, smaller, cool games. You'd get Resident Evil Revelations, or you'd get like an on-rail shooter, stuff like that, but there really wasn't that same sense of like gravitas of here's the next big mainline entry. So Resident Evil 7 introducing a new hero, making it first person, making it very different, not having zombies and T-Virus. That was such a giant gamble that turned out to be so overwhelmingly successful that after that, Capcom was on the spot where they started to talk about, all right, Resident Evil 2 Remake sold insane numbers. Clearly, we've still got the sauce. Let's make sure that we're making the best possible Resident Evils, the best cadence of Resident Evils, and the best future plans for Resident Evils, right? So this meeting has been leaked multiple times. It definitely happened. But what's interesting is this. Each project uses different internal codenames. Project Chambers for the Resident Evil 0 remake, obviously. Project Fallen for the Resident Evil 1 remake. And Project Redlife for Resident Evil 10. Now, each of these codenames, very fascinating, right? Project Fallen for Resident Evil 1. There's been a lot of debate about whether Resident Evil 1 needs a remake. The original RE1, or the remake that came out on GameCube that is playable on current consoles, is still fantastic. I'm not here to pretend that it's an unplayable slop fest. There are some Resident Evils. I'm currently replaying Code Veronica OG. That game is not, in some aspects, aged the best. A little too much backtracking, a little bit too much of able to possibly brick your save file kind of stuff. Whereas I think that Resident Evil 1 is such a good game, but even I am a starch defender for the idea of a remake of it. Mostly because I love the remake Resident Evil 2 so dang much. Even just playing through it, even if the story is, similar enough, the monsters, the designs, the layout is similar enough, there's something about being able to just walk from one end of Raccoon City into the police department and then all the way through the police department with zero load screens, actually zombies chasing you from room to room, windows getting smashed in. Like, I want to see that quality of Resident Evil 2 remake put into the Resident Evil 1 remake, and I think it's going to be the biggest thing of all time, right? But I think it's also interesting, Redlife, Code Veronica basically being a lead-in for Resident Evil 10, right? Code Veronica also has a big, obviously, giant focus on Claire Redfield. But let me keep going through this. Resident Evil 1 Remake has been in pre-production since 2020 through 2023, has recently entered full production. Now, this has been debated by some of the leakers that apparently full production for Capcom is not exactly the way that it was for other people. Like other companies, the way they sort of do it is you have a team that does everything from start to finish. The artists, the marketing team, the programmers, the director, everybody does something from the very start to the very end. Capcom now basically has this big soup of developers. A bunch of people are working on this chunk of a game, which is why if you look at the credits, you'll notice a person that worked on like a little bit of the DLC of one game is working on the main part of this game. Everybody is kind of working on everything, which is wild because the games feel incredibly complete, incredibly like vision intense for the fact that everybody's kind of doing everything. So full production doesn't even necessarily mean that they're like grinding away on it to have it ready next year. It's more of, okay, the main team that's definitely going to be working on it is currently working on it, but like the main focus right now is Code Veronica remake, the Resident Evil 0 remake, and then Resident Evil 10. This is something that's probably going to come out earliest like 2030. Claire Redfield has been confirmed as the protagonist of Project Redlife, positioning her as the central character in the next mainline numbered entry. Now, this is the thing, is that the reason I believe this so much is that what happened before we got Resident Evil Requiem It was clearly part of a very long, very well thought out 6-year plan. Because we had Resident Evil 2 Remake, fantastic. Resident Evil 4 Remake, somehow even better than the original, right? Okay, so we got both those. And then, what do we get after that? A return story of Leon. Essentially, a modern trilogy of just the Leon goodness. Now, those games had other characters. They had Ada Wong and stuff. But this, to me, signified we're going to bring this character back. We're going to age them up. We're going to make them awesome. And then we're going to show you what they look like now. So them doing that with Claire Redfield, right? Here's Code Veronica. You just experienced her in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Now we're getting the Code Veronica Remake. Now we're going to get something like the Chambers Project, Resident Evil 0. Let's sort of experience all of that. So when you see maybe the famous ladies of Resident Evil, let's say it is Rebecca Chambers, let's say it is Claire Redfield as the protagonist, and let's say that, of course, hopefully at least a cameo by Jill Valentine, all of that together in Resident Evil 10 would be an absolutely insane thing. There has been multiple leaks actually from Dusk himself that Dusk has been talking about the fact that apparently with a Code Veronica remake, it is going to be focusing more on Claire Redfield. He basically has said that Claire Redfield, in the original version of Code Veronica, she's taking half of the fun. In the original version of Code Veronica, basically you're playing as Claire Redfield and Chris Redfield, and it's skewed surprisingly heavy towards Chris, just because the fact that really it is... The story 95% is about Claire Redfield, but 40% of the game you're playing as Chris, and it feels very much out of place. Like Dusk has been talking about the fact that the remake of Code Veronica, it's going to basically sort of fix that. It's going to have much more focus on Claire, not only as the hero, but all right, when Chris shows up, it's for a boss fight or for a event, instead of trying to make it this weird 50-50 adventure that really only hurts an otherwise very good story. So let's have that Claire-focused, crazy Resident Evil Code Veronica remake, and it leads into Resident Evil 10. That would be absolutely wild. Both Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 10 are confirmed to be built on Capcom's latest Resident Evil X engine. Or actually, I'm joking around. So Capcom's engine does not mean Resident Evil. It means Reach for the Moon. I don't know why. So it's the Reach for the X engine. You know, they can call it whatever they want. It's awesome. The same technology powering recent high-fidelity titles in the series. In 2022, the same year as the key internal meeting, Capcom shut down multiple high-profile fan remakes of RE0, Code Veronica, and Resident Evil 1, suggesting the company is protecting its official plans. Now, they did do this in the past. This is actually what they did right before they announced the Resident Evil 2 remake. If you've ever played that game, Daymare 1998, there was basically a giant, really high-budget fan project that was completely remake Resident Evil 2. Capcom shut that down the year they announced the Resident Evil 2 remake. So I do think there's a very strong chance that they're sort of setting the stage of, okay, we want to make sure all the search engine optimization and YouTube results are our actual trailers when we announce that like Code Veronica remake coming up here at Summer Games Fest. This is the thing, though, is that I think the idea of bringing back Devil May Cry 1, to me, is still the craziest concept. Some of this other stuff is extremely fun. Of course, I'm excited about Ada Wong coming into a, like, Resident Evil DLC again. God, I'm so excited to see her again. This is all super interesting, but I have to say that there's a logic to it. Maybe it's just me, but I like the idea of Capcom doing new game, old storyline, finish a character. New game, new story, finish a character. Remake, new game, finish a character. It feels like they've been doing that for a couple years, and the magic is just, it's so functional. I love what Capcom's been doing, but it's also more than that, right? I just love that Resident Evil doesn't feel afraid to constantly keep doing different stuff. They're going to introduce new characters. They're going to make new heroes. They're going to do what they want. Like Resident Evil 10 introducing Grace and her being like a bumbling, like, normie and still kicking butt in a game. I like that Resident Evil is just still trying to reinvent itself, and it's not just a pile of lazy, half-assed remakes. But how do you feel about this? How do you feel about Dusk Golem? Some people have been sort of anti-Dusk Golem lately, saying, oh, some of his leaks about Silent Hill, like the Silent Hill DLC, turned out to be false. But to me, I'm still very much a Dusk Golem cultist. Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and keep dreaming. And listen to some My Chemical Romance. Or what is that? Evanescence. Wake me up inside. Save me. Yeah, you know what? I'm recording this video at 7 a.m. I need to wake me up inside.
Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.